The stench was unbearable. Detective Charlotte Lawson had encountered many gruesome crime scenes in her 15-year career with the Chicago Police Department, but nothing could have prepared her for this. As she stood at the edge of the murky waters of Lake Michigan, watching as divers pulled yet another black garbage bag from its depths, she felt a chill that had nothing to do with the brisk autumn air. "That's the seventh one, Detective," Officer Mike Rodriguez said, his voice muffled by the mask he wore to combat the putrid odor. "Lab's preliminary report suggests we're looking at parts from at least 3 different victims." Charlotte nodded grimly, her eyes never leaving the shore where forensic teams were carefully opening the bags, documenting their horrific contents. "3 victims," she murmured. 3 lives ended, cut to pieces, and dumped like trash. Who does something like this? Little did she know, the answer to that question would lead her on a 2-year journey into the darkest recesses of human nature, unraveling a tale of love twisted into obsession, jealousy that burned hot enough to consume everything in its path, and an evil so profound it would haunt her for years to come. As the sun began to set over the Chicago skyline, casting long shadows across the crime scene, Charlotte couldn't shake the feeling that this case would change everything. She had no way of knowing just how right she was. To understand the tragedy that would unfold, one must first understand the players in this grim drama. At the center of it all was Lily Chen, a vibrant 25-year-old graphic designer whose infectious laugh and kind heart had a way of drawing people to her like moths to a flame. Lily was the only child of Margaret Chen, a strong-willed single mother who had immigrated from China when Lily was just a toddler. Margaret had worked tirelessly as a nurse to provide for her daughter, instilling in Lily a strong work ethic and an appreciation for the opportunities America offered. "Lily was the light of my life," Margaret would later tell detectives, her eyes brimming with tears. "Everything I did for her, to give her a better life than I had." That better life seemed well within Lily's grasp. She had graduated with honors from the School of the Art Institute of Chicago and quickly landed a job at a prestigious advertising firm. Her career was on the rise, and she had a close-knit group of friends who adored her. Chief among those friends was Zoe Taylor, Lily's best friend since their freshman year of college. Zoe, a vivacious redhead with a penchant for vintage fashion and indie rock, was Lily's opposite in many ways. Where Lily was thoughtful and sometimes reserved, Zoe was outspoken and always ready for an adventure. Together, they balanced each other perfectly. "Lily and Zoe were inseparable," recalled Jake Morrison, a mutual friend. "You never saw one without the other. They were like sisters, finishing each other's sentences, always having each other's backs. It was beautiful to see, that kind of friendship." It was at one of Zoe's infamous house parties that Lily met the man who would change her life forever, Eric Daniels. Eric was, by all accounts, the perfect catch. At 28, he was already making waves in Chicago's tech scene as the co-founder of a promising startup. Tall, with piercing blue eyes and a charismatic smile, Eric had a way of making everyone feel like the most important person in the room. When Eric walked in, it was like the air changed. Zoe would later recount to the police. "He had this presence, and the way he looked at Lily, I remember thinking, this is it. This is the guy she's been waiting for." For Lily, it was love at first sight. Eric was charming, intelligent, and seemed genuinely interested in her work and her dreams. They talked for hours that night, long after the other partygoers had left or passed out on various pieces of furniture. "I've never believed in soulmates," Lily confided to Zoe the next day, her eyes shining with excitement. "But with Eric, it's different. It's like I've known him my whole life." Zoe, ever the protective friend, was cautiously optimistic. "He seems great, Lil. Just be careful, okay? You know how these tech bros can be." But Lily was already head over heels. And for the first few months, it seemed like she had found her fairy tale ending. Eric was attentive and romantic, surprising her with flowers at work, planning elaborate dates, and charming both Margaret and Zoe with his wit and generosity. "He was so good to her," Margaret would later say, her voice tinged with regret. I really thought he was the one who would take care of my Lily when I couldn't anymore." The couple quickly became the talk of their social circle. They were young, successful, and madly in love. Instagram posts showcased their glamorous life, exotic vacations, intimate dinners at Chicago's finest restaurants, and cozy nights in at Eric's luxurious downtown loft. They were hash couple goals, said Amber Lee, one of Lily's coworkers. Everyone wanted what they had. It seemed too good to be true. And as it turned out, it was. Because beneath Eric's perfect exterior lurked a darkness that would soon consume everything in its path. A possessiveness that masqueraded as love, a jealousy that burned like acid, eating away at the foundations of their relationship until there was nothing left but ashes. The first signs were subtle. Eric's texts became more frequent, asking where Lily was, who she was with. He began showing up unannounced at her workplace, bringing lunch or coffee, always with that charming smile that disarmed any concerns. "I just missed you," he'd say, pulling her close. "Is it a crime to want to spend every moment with the woman I love?" Lily, still in the throes of new love, found it endearing. She mistook his possessiveness for passion, his controlling behavior for care. But Zoe saw through it. He's isolating her. Zoe confided to Margaret over coffee one afternoon, about 6 months into Lily and Eric's relationship. "Have you noticed how she barely hangs out with anyone else anymore? It's always Eric and I this or Eric and I that. I'm worried." Margaret, however, was hesitant to interfere. "They're in love, Zoe. Young love is always intense. I'm sure it'll settle down." But it didn't settle down. Instead, Eric's behavior escalated, his jealousy growing like a cancer, metastasizing until it infected every aspect of their relationship. He convinced Lily to install a tracking app on her phone, just in case of emergencies. He became critical of her clothing choices, suggesting she dress more modestly. He questioned her late nights at work, insinuating that she might be seeing someone else. "I just love you so much," he'd say, his eyes welling up with tears that Lily would later realize were as false as his promises. "The thought of losing you, it kills me. You're my everything, Lily. I can't live without you." And Lily, raised on a steady diet of romantic comedies and fairy tales, mistook his obsession for devotion. She began to change herself to please him, to quell the storms of his jealousy. She distanced herself from friends, changed her wardrobe, and even considered quitting her job when Eric suggested she might be spending too much time with her male colleagues. It was Zoe who finally decided enough was enough. On a rare girls' night out, one that had taken weeks of planning and reassuring Eric, she confronted her friend. "This isn't healthy, Lil," Zoe said, her voice filled with concern. "The way he controls you, the way he's changed you, this isn't love. It's abuse." Lily, defensive and perhaps deep down aware of the truth in Zoe's words, lashed out. "You're just jealous," she snapped. "You've always been jealous of what Eric and I have. You don't understand our love." The argument that followed was explosive. Harsh words were exchanged, years of friendship strained to the breaking point. Lily stormed out of the bar, leaving Zoe behind, tears streaming down her face. Neither of them knew it then, but that night would be the last time they would speak as friends. The next time Zoe saw Lily, it would be in photographs on a missing persons report, her smiling face plastered across the local news as Chicago wondered, what happened to Lily Chen? The answer to that question would prove to be more horrifying than anyone could have imagined. The day Lily Chen disappeared started like any other. She woke up in Eric's apartment, as she had been doing more and more frequently, and prepared for work. Eric, as usual, was attentive and loving, making her breakfast and kissing her goodbye at the door. "Have a great day, baby," he said, his smile warm and seemingly genuine. "I love you." "Love you too," Lily replied, blowing him a kiss as she stepped into the elevator. It would be the last time anyone saw Lily Chen alive. When she didn't show up for work that day, her colleagues were concerned but not immediately alarmed. It wasn't like Lily to miss work without calling, but everyone has off days. Maybe she was sick and had forgotten to call in. But as the hours ticked by and calls to her cell phone went straight to voicemail, worry began to set in. By late afternoon, Amber Lee, Lily's work friend, decided to call Margaret. "Mrs. Chen? It's Amber from Lily's office. I'm sorry to bother you, but is Lily with you? She hasn't come in today, and we can't reach her." The panic in Margaret's voice was immediate and palpable. "What do you mean she hasn't come in? She's not answering her phone? Have you called Eric?" Eric, when reached, seemed appropriately concerned. He told Margaret that Lily had left for work that morning as usual. "I'm sure she's fine," he said, his voice calm and reassuring. "Maybe her phone died. I'll go check the apartment and call you right back." But hours passed, and Eric didn't call back. When Margaret tried to reach him again, his phone too went straight to voicemail. Frantic now, she called the police to report her daughter missing. Detective Charlotte Lawson caught the case. From the beginning, something about it niggled at her instincts. A 25-year-old woman with a stable job and close family ties doesn't just vanish into thin air, she told her partner, Detective John Rivera. Something's not right here. As they began to dig into Lily's life, interviewing friends, family, and coworkers, a disturbing picture began to emerge. Nearly everyone they spoke to mentioned Eric, his controlling behavior, his jealousy, the way Lily had changed since being with him. Zoe Taylor's interview was particularly illuminating. Through tears, she recounted their argument, her fears about Eric's behavior, and her regret at not pushing harder to help her friend. "I should have done more," Zoe sobbed. "I knew something was wrong, but I let her push me away. Oh God, what if he's done something to her?" Eric, for his part, played the role of the distraught boyfriend perfectly. He cooperated with the police, allowed them to search his apartment, and even organized search parties to comb the city for any sign of Lily. "I just want her back," he told reporters at a press conference. His voice choked with emotion. "Lily, if you're out there, please come home. I love you." But as days turned into weeks with no sign of Lily, suspicion began to focus more and more on Eric. Detective Lawson's team uncovered a series of troubling incidents that had been swept under the rug. Complaints from Eric's ex-girlfriends about stalking behavior, a restraining order that had been filed and then mysteriously dropped. "This guy's got a pattern," Rivera said, pinning another photo to their evidence board. "He finds these successful, beautiful women, love bombs them, and then slowly isolates them from friends and family. Classic abuser behavior." But suspicion wasn't enough. They needed evidence. And Eric, despite hours of interrogation, didn't break. His alibi for the day of Lily's disappearance was shaky, but not impossible. He claimed to have been working from home, with only a few video calls to corroborate his story. The investigation stalled. Weeks turned into months. Lily's face faded from the news, replaced by newer, fresher tragedies. But Margaret Chen and Zoe Taylor refused to give up hope. They kept Lily's story alive on social media, organized vigils, and pressured the police to keep investigating. Margaret, in particular, became a fixture at the police station, calling daily for updates and often showing up in person to plead for more to be done. She was relentless, Lawson would later recall. "There were days when I wanted to give up, when it seemed like we'd hit every dead end possible. But seeing Margaret there, day after day, with that mix of hope and desperation in her eyes, it kept us going." It was Margaret's persistence that led to the first real break in the case. Nearly a year after Lily's disappearance, Margaret was going through her daughter's old things, hoping to find something, anything, that might provide a clue. In a box of college mementos, she found an old diary. Most of the entries were typical college stuff, complaints about exams, gossip about friends, musings on life. But tucked in the back pages, Margaret found something chilling. A list of names and addresses, written in Lily's neat handwriting, under the heading, "In case something happens to me." With shaking hands, Margaret called Detective Lawson. I think Lily knew she was in danger," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "She left us a message." The list turned out to be a goldmine of information. It included names of Eric's ex-girlfriends, former coworkers, even a therapist he had seen briefly. People who, Lily had realized, might have information about Eric's true nature. Armed with this new lead, Lawson and her team began reaching out to the people on the list. Slowly, painfully, a picture began to emerge of a man whose charming exterior hid a monster. "He was like Jekyll and Hyde," one ex-girlfriend told them. "One minute, he'd be the perfect boyfriend. The next, he'd fly into these rages, accusing me of cheating, threatening to hurt himself if I left him. I was terrified." Another woman, a former coworker, revealed that Eric had been fired from a previous job for stalking a client. "The company hushed it up," she said, "paid the woman off to avoid a scandal. I always wondered if he'd do it again." But the most damning testimony came from Eric's former therapist. Despite concerns about patient confidentiality, she agreed to speak with the police after being assured of the seriousness of the situation. Eric Daniels is a textbook case of narcissistic personality disorder with strong sociopathic tendencies, she told Lawson. He's charming and intelligent, which makes him all the more dangerous. He sees people not as individuals, but as possessions, and when he feels he's losing control of someone. She didn't need to finish the sentence. Lawson and her team had seen enough cases to know where this was heading. Armed with this new information, they obtained a warrant to conduct a more thorough search of Eric's properties. Not just his apartment, but a storage unit he rented and a cabin in the woods that he'd recently purchased. It was at the cabin that they found the first physical evidence linking Eric to Lily's disappearance. In a fire pit behind the building, forensic teams uncovered tiny fragments of bone and teeth. DNA testing would later confirm what they all feared. The remains belonged to Lily Chen. But the horror didn't end there. As they continued to search the property, they uncovered more remains. Some belonged to Margaret Chen, who had disappeared 3 months after her daughter, her absence initially attributed to grief-driven suicide. Others were identified as Zoe Taylor, who had vanished 6 months after Lily, while still actively campaigning to keep her friend's case in the public eye. The full extent of Eric's crimes was finally coming to light, and it was more horrific than anyone could have imagined. The arrest of Eric Daniels sent shockwaves through Chicago. The charming tech entrepreneur, the grieving boyfriend who had pleaded for the safe return of his girlfriend on national television, was now revealed to be a cold-blooded killer. As the evidence mounted, the story that emerged was one of calculated evil that left even seasoned investigators shaken. Eric, it seemed, had not killed in a fit of rage or a moment of insanity. His crimes were premeditated, carefully planned, and executed with chilling precision. Lily, investigators believe, was Eric's first victim. Though they may never know exactly what transpired on the day of her disappearance, forensic evidence suggested that she had been strangled in Eric's apartment. Her body was then dismembered in the bathtub, a task that Eric had apparently prepared for by purchasing an electric saw and heavy-duty garbage bags weeks in advance. He knew, Detective Lawson said during a press conference. He knew he was going to kill her. This wasn't a crime of passion. It was premeditated murder. But Eric's crimes didn't end with Lily. As the investigation into her disappearance intensified, Eric realized that Margaret Chen and Zoe Taylor posed a threat to his freedom. They were too vocal, too persistent in their search for the truth. Margaret was the next to die. Eric, playing the role of the supportive almost son-in-law, had offered to drive her to a support group for families of missing persons. She was never seen again. Her remains, like Lily's, were found scattered around the property of Eric's cabin. Zoe's murder, 6 months later, followed a similar pattern. Eric had reached out to her, claiming to have new information about Lily's disappearance. Always hopeful, always fighting for her friend, Zoe had agreed to meet him. It was the last mistake she would ever make. As the full story came to light, the question on everyone's mind was, how? How had Eric managed to commit these horrific crimes and evade detection for so long? The answer, as it often is in such cases, lay in Eric's intelligence and careful planning. He had used his tech skills to create elaborate digital alibis, manipulating timestamps on emails and video calls to create the illusion of normalcy on the days of the murders. He had chosen his cabin, located in a remote area with poor cell phone reception, as the perfect place to dispose of the bodies. The acid-rich soil in the area had accelerated decomposition, making it difficult for investigators to find usable evidence. But perhaps most chillingly, Eric had used his charm and apparent grief to manipulate those around him. He had inserted himself into the investigation, attending vigils, participating in searches, even comforting other friends and family members of the victims. He was hiding in plain sight. Lawson would later write in her memoir of the case, using our own empathy and desire to believe in the good in people against us. It's a mistake I'll never make again. As the case against Eric built, more and more women came forward with stories of their own encounters with him. A pattern emerged of a man who saw relationships as a game to be won, women as prizes to be possessed and discarded at will. He made me feel special, one woman told investigators, like I was the only person in the world who understood him. But when I tried to leave, that's when I saw the real Eric. The rage, the threats, I was lucky to get away. Not everyone had been so lucky. As the investigation widened, evidence emerged linking Eric to at least two other unsolved disappearances in the Chicago area. Young women, all fitting a similar profile, successful, beautiful, with bright futures ahead of them. All had vanished without a trace after being seen in Eric's company. The trial of Eric Daniels became a media sensation. Cameras flashed as he was led into the courtroom each day, his once charming smile now a cold, emotionless mask. He had pleaded not guilty, his defense team arguing that the evidence was circumstantial, that he was being railroaded by a police force desperate to solve a high-profile case. But as the prosecution presented its case, the weight of evidence became overwhelming. Forensic experts testified about the DNA evidence found at the cabin. Digital forensic specialists outlined how Eric had created his false alibis. Former girlfriends took the stand, telling their stories of emotional abuse and manipulation. Perhaps the most damning testimony came from Eric's own cousin, Michael Daniels. In a hushed courtroom, Michael recounted a conversation he'd had with Eric just weeks before Lily's disappearance. He told me that if he couldn't have Lily, no one could, Michael said, his voice shaking. I thought he was just being dramatic, you know. I never imagined he'd actually. Throughout the trial, Eric remained impassive, showing no emotion, even as the most gruesome details of his crimes were laid bare. It was only when the verdict was read, guilty on all counts, that a flicker of something crossed his face. Was it anger? Fear? Or perhaps most chillingly, a hint of satisfaction at having his brilliance finally recognized? The sentencing hearing was a somber affair. Family members of the victims gave impact statements, their pain and anger palpable in every word. Margaret Chen's sister spoke of a family shattered, a mother who had died trying to find justice for her child. Zoe Taylor's parents talked about a vibrant young woman whose only crime had been loyalty to her friend. When it came time for Eric to speak, the courtroom held its breath. Would he show remorse? Offer some explanation for his heinous acts? Instead, Eric stood, smoothed his designer suit, and addressed the court with the same charismatic confidence that had once charmed so many. I regret nothing, he said, his voice calm and steady. I loved them, all of them, more deeply, more truly than any of you could understand. They were mine, and in death, they'll always be mine. You can lock me away, but you can't take that away from me. A collective gasp went up from the gallery. Even Eric's own lawyers seemed shocked by this display of callousness. The judge, his face a mask of disgust, wasted no time in handing down his sentence. Eric Daniels, for the murders of Lily Chen, Margaret Chen, and Zoe Taylor, and for the pain and suffering you have caused to countless others, I hereby sentence you to death. May God have mercy on your soul. As Eric was led away, Detective Charlotte Lawson watched from the back of the courtroom. The case had taken its toll on her. Sleepless nights, strained relationships, the weight of 3 lost lives heavy on her conscience. But as she saw Eric disappear through the door to begin his journey to death row, she felt a glimmer of something like peace. We got him, she murmured to herself. We got him. 5 years after the trial of Eric Daniels, the scars left by his crimes were still visible in the lives of those he had touched. Detective Charlotte Lawson, hailed as a hero for her role in bringing Eric to justice, found herself unable to shake the case. She had thrown herself into advocating for better resources for domestic violence prevention, using Lily's story as a cautionary tale about the dangers of coercive control. If we can save even one person from going through what Lily, Margaret, and Zoe went through, she often said in her public speaking engagements, then their deaths won't have been in vain. The Chen and Taylor families, bonded by shared tragedy, had formed a foundation in memory of their lost loved ones. The Lily and Zoe Foundation worked to educate young people about the signs of abusive relationships and provided resources for those trying to escape dangerous situations. Eric Daniels remained on death row, his appeals slowly working their way through the system. He had become something of a true crime celebrity, the subject of countless books, documentaries, and podcasts. Many were fascinated by the question that had haunted the case from the beginning. How could someone so seemingly normal commit such monstrous acts? For those who had known Eric, the aftermath of his crimes was a journey of guilt, self-recrimination, and eventual healing. Jake Morrison, the friend who had introduced Lily to Eric at that fateful party, struggled with depression and alcohol abuse before finally seeking help. "I blamed myself for so long," he said in an interview for a documentary about the case. "If I hadn't introduced them, but I've learned that the only person responsible for Eric's actions is Eric. We were all fooled by him." Amber Lee, Lily's coworker, had become an active volunteer for the Lily and Zoe Foundation. "I keep thinking about all the little signs I missed," she said. "The way Lily would jump when her phone rang, how she stopped going out with us after work. I want to make sure other people know what to look for, that they don't make the same mistakes we did." As for Eric himself, he showed no remorse. In rare interviews granted from prison, he continued to speak of Lily, Margaret, and Zoe as if they had been willing participants in some grand love story rather than victims of his brutal crimes. "They're mine forever now," he told one interviewer, his blue eyes as cold and empty as they had been in the courtroom. "In a way, I've achieved what every great love story aspires to: eternal, undying love." The interviewer, shaken by Eric's words, had terminated the interview early. His chilling statement became the subject of much discussion and analysis, a stark reminder of the twisted logic that had driven him to commit such horrific acts. As the years passed, the case of Eric Daniels became more than just another true crime story. It became a cautionary tale, a stark reminder of the darkness that can lurk behind even the most charming facade. In criminology classes, psychology seminars, and domestic violence workshops, the story of Lily Chen and Eric Daniels was told and retold, analyzed and dissected. But for those who had lived through it, for the families left behind and the lives forever altered, it remained a very personal tragedy. A reminder of lives cut short, of potential unfulfilled, of a love twisted into something unrecognizable. On the anniversary of Lily's disappearance each year, a small group would gather in a quiet corner of a Chicago park. They would light candles, share memories, and renew their commitment to keeping the spirits of Lily, Margaret, and Zoe alive through their work to prevent similar tragedies. And as the candles flickered in the twilight, casting long shadows across the faces of those gathered, there was a sense of both sorrow and hope. Sorrow for what had been lost, but hope that in sharing this story, in keeping the memory of Lily, Margaret, and Zoe alive, they might prevent other lives from being shattered by the Eric Daniels of the world. In the end, that was all they could do. Remember, educate, and hope that someday, somehow, the cycle of violence would be broken. The story of Eric Daniels and his victims would live on, a dark chapter in Chicago's history, a reminder of the evil that can exist in the world, but also of the resilience of those left behind, their determination to find meaning in tragedy and to create light in even the darkest of places. As Detective Charlotte Lawson often said at the end of her presentations, her voice filled with both sadness and determination. "We couldn't save Lily, Margaret, and Zoe, but through their story, we might save others. And in that way, they live on. In that way, they continue to make the world a better place, even after they're gone." And in a quiet cemetery on the outskirts of Chicago, 3 headstones stood side by side, a permanent reminder of lives cut short and a love story turned nightmare. Lily Chen, Margaret Chen, and Zoe Taylor, united in life by love and friendship, in death by tragedy, and beyond death by the ongoing fight to prevent others from sharing their fate. Their story had ended, but its impact continued to ripple outward, touching lives, changing perspectives, and serving as a stark reminder of the darkness that can hide behind the most charming of smiles.